In this video, I'm going to show you how you can repurpose a very worn and scuffed up tabletop like this one by installing Formica laminate on top of it. So let's get into it. Okay, so the tabletop that I want to install laminate on is actually our very first dining room table, but more recently I had been using it in the shop as a work surface, so it was pretty gnarly to be honest. In order to get this thing prepped for laminate, I took it outside and I worked on sanding off the year's worth of glue and paint drips until it was pretty smooth. After sanding, I made sure to give it a good cleaning so as to not trap any of the dust under the new laminate top. Next up, I had to take some measurements of my top because the plan was to add some hardwood trim to the edges of my tabletop prior to attaching laminate. Now, this is a little tip that I picked up from a laminate install video that I watched from Bourbon Moth's channel. His video had lots of just helpful tricks, so if you're looking for more videos to watch about the subject matter, then I would highly suggest watching his video as well. I'll leave it linked below. So back to this hardwood trim. I decided to make my trim out of some ash simply because it was a board that I had in the shop that I wasn't using for anything else, so it seemed like a good fit. So I just worked on cutting the trim pieces for each of my 4 sides. Now these pieces ended up being 3/4 inches in thickness, and I just ripped each of them to a width of 1 inch. Once I got my pieces cut to size, then I attached them to the top itself using wood glue and brad nails. I made sure to leave them just a little high so that I could come back and sand everything smooth. Now, it's better to leave the trim above the surface of the tabletop than below it. After a while, I had the whole tabletop completely trimmed out. It's also worth mentioning that if you have an extra set of hands for doing this, it'll go so much smoother. Luckily, one of my favorite coworkers, my mom, showed up to assist me with the next few steps. Once all of the trim was attached, I worked on sanding everything smooth. Now you want to make sure that it's completely even or the laminate won't attach correctly and it'll show the unevenness. So just take the time to make sure everything is completely flush. Then it was time to get the laminate itself cut to size. Now I would recommend leaving the laminate in its packaging until you're ready to use it. Once you unroll it, it can become quite awkward and just hard to manage. After measuring my tabletop, I made sure to add a little extra to each of my sides to make sure I had enough laminate to cover everything. I will trim off the excess later. Now to cut the laminate, I clamped a straight edge on my mark and then I used a laminate scorer to score a line on the laminate. After doing this several times, we were able to snap the piece off exactly on that line. Now, if I could do this part over again, I would have probably worn gloves here because that cut laminate edge is sharp. I sliced my finger pretty good on it, so wear gloves if you can. And while we're on the topic of recommending safety gear, might I also suggest that you wear safety glasses and ear protection here because using that laminate scorer is awfully similar to the whole nails on the chalkboard situation. 10 out of 10 would not recommend to do that without covering your ears. You'll be glad you did. Now it's time to permanently attach the laminate to my old tabletop. For this I used a little something called contact cement. If you've heard of it before, well, that's because it's been around for a long time. The way this stuff works is basically you just roll it onto both your old tabletop and the back of the laminate itself, and then you let it fully dry. Once it's dry, then you attach the 2 pieces together and some sort of chemical reaction happens that makes the 2 stick together. That's about as technical as I can explain it, because to be honest, I don't know exactly how it works. I just know
it's science.
So I just made sure to coat both of my pieces really well with this stuff, just making sure I didn't leave any areas uncovered. Now that the contact cement was fully dry, my next step was to attach the laminate to my top. To do this, you want to take some scrap pieces of wood or anything that can sort of create a barrier between the 2 pieces. This will allow you time to line everything up. Because once those 2 pieces make contact, they're stuck. Hence the name contact cement. Anyways, you just want to make sure that the pieces you use to do this are clean because you don't want things falling off of them that can get stuck in between the laminate and your tabletop. After taking some time to line everything up exactly where I wanted it, I then began by removing my scrap piece in the middle first. Once that piece was removed, I then firmly pressed down the middle to allow the two pieces to make contact. From there, I would work my way out to each side, removing a piece and then using a rubber roller to put good pressure on the two of them to make them stick together. Once I had worked my way to one side, I simply repeated the process and then worked my way to the edge of the other side. Once all of my scrap pieces were removed, I spent a good chunk of time thoroughly rolling over everything to make sure I had good adhesion. The last thing you want after all of that prep work is to have an area that didn't adhere. So I really worked on making sure it was good before moving on. I then let it dry overnight before trimming off the excess. To get the laminate flush with the edge of my tabletop, I ended up using a flush trim bit in my palm router, and I just ran that ball bearing along the edge of my hardwood trim, and this worked really well at removing all of the excess laminate. I was a little worried that this might cause some tear out or chipping, but I had a brand new bit in my router, so I think that might have helped prevent some of that. With the edges now flush, I ran over them again with my router, this time with a chamfer bit, and I chamfered the edges just slightly to knock down that sharp edge. Now this really helped tie the two together and it made it feel like a finished top. And that's everything it took to freshen up this ugly tabletop by installing laminate. A pretty simple way to bring new life to a piece. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and maybe learned some things along the way. If you did, feel free to give it a like and consider subscribing. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be seeing you guys again soon. Bye.